This is the true account of Erwin Bartmann, a soldier of the infamous Leibstandarte SS. After brutal service on the Eastern Front and months stationed in Ukraine, his division was transferred to Paris for rest and reorganization. From the chaos of the East to the strange calm of occupied France, Bartmann's story offers a rare glimpse into the life of an SS man across two very different worlds, and the unsettling contrasts he witnessed along the way. The air was clear, pure, the cold so intense the skin on my face tingled as if pricked by a million tiny needles. My bones seemed to rattle under my shivering muscles, and my legs, frostbitten during the retreat from Rostov, were numb. To keep the blood flowing, I danced from foot to foot as I swung my arms across my chest in the entrance ditch to my one-man bunker. Through the cloud of condensing breath hovering around my head, a figure caught my eye. Hobbling from foxhole to foxhole, he spent a few minutes in each. As he came closer, I recognized him as an Oberscharführer recently released from the field surgery unit in Taganrog. I put out a hand to help him climb down into my trench. "Oberscharführer, you're taking a risk." "Naja, Ivan's been quiet today," he replied nonchalantly. There was a wry smile on his remarkably fresh-looking face. Almost everyone else around me seemed to have aged by at least 10 years since winter took its first hard grip in late November. He pulled back his camouflage jacket to show the collar of his tunic. The mirror, where 2 silver pips had been, was empty. "Schütze now," he said. Soon we were sharing stories, and I ventured to ask him why he had been demoted all the way down to Schütze. The smile on his face evaporated. "You know that girl I was living with?" I had heard the gossip. It was well known in the company that he had been in private quarters with a very attractive young Ukrainian woman. She had a rose-pink complexion and hair so blonde it had the sheen of finest gold. Everyone knew what was going on between them. I nodded. "What happened?" "Shot herself. Used my 08 to do it." It was lucky for him that his punishment had been so lenient. As for the girl, it was certain that if we pulled back, her liberators would make an example of her. Perhaps it was for that reason she had killed herself. Anyway, I didn't think it appropriate to pursue the matter further. The Oberscharführer, somehow I could not bring myself to think of him as a mere Schütze, took his soulbook from his tunic pocket and opened it. Inside was a picture of the woman. With a sorrowful sigh he passed it to me. She had beautiful high cheekbones and a wide, inviting smile. It was easy to see why he had become infatuated with her. When I handed back the picture, he stared at it for a silent moment before ripping it into tiny shreds that he let fall to the snow. "It's better if I forget her," he said solemnly. Suddenly his mood brightened. "Now I can do what I came here for. Happy birthday, Erwin," he beamed as he slapped my back. "The cook, he told me it was your birthday." It had been my turn to collect the large insulated vessel used to carry food from the field kitchen earlier that morning, 12th December 1941. And I recalled having joked with the cook by asking for a little extra goulash because it was my birthday. "It's my birthday too, today," said my visitor. We chatted about how we would spend our time after our inevitable final victory. As he made to leave, a feeling of intense unease gripped me, and I hooked a hand over his shoulder to restrain him. "Watch out. You were a sitting duck when you came over. This still air is perfect for a sniper. No need to allow for wind when he aims." "You worry too much," he said, shrugging his shoulders before scrambling out of the trench. He took a few paces back the way he had come, then turned and stood for a moment, lost in some private thought, gazing across the frozen fields before slinging his rifle over his shoulder. There was a metallic clink. His head swayed under the weight of his steel helmet, then his arms fell limply to his sides. The rifle slid from his shoulder and he slumped to his knees like a burst sack of flour. He groaned something, it might have been his girlfriend's name, before falling face first into the snow. His helmet rolled away from his head and rocked back and forth a few times before coming to rest on a patch of ice. Bright blood spread under his face, freezing in seconds into a congealed mass, its redness intensified by the purity of the snow. At the front of the helmet, exactly in the center, was a perfectly round hole. I cursed myself for mentioning my birthday to the cook and kept my head down for the rest of that day. When the dazzling winter sun had sunk below the horizon, a couple of medics recovered the frozen body of my visitor and took it to Taganrog for burial in a grave marked by the SS death rune, a cross with drooping arms, in the soldier's graveyard. It was in the vindictive nature of the Russians to flatten these graveyards when they reoccupied ground we gave up, so it is certain that his grave now lies unmarked, its location forgotten. A few days later, we moved to Sambeck, where we constructed strong defensive positions to protect the approach to Taganrog from the east. We, the survivors of 4th Company, occupied the upper part of the settlement with orders to defend a line of approximately 1 kilometer in length, a formidable task for about 60 men. The houses were to become our accommodation, and although it was harsh to expel the inhabitants from their homes in such cold weather, they accepted the situation without complaint. It was my hope that they would find accommodation in the undamaged farm buildings scattered across the countryside, away from the village, which was now certain to attract the attention of the enemy's artillery. A woman with a child holding onto her hand patted my arm as she passed. "At least we are able to pray in our churches once more," she said. With the town cleared of civilians, we began the construction of a deep bunker, partly under the foundations of a house on steeply sloping ground. Thankfully, the earth was not completely frozen, and the heavy physical work kept us warm as we heaped the excavated soil at the side of the house. Now and then we came across buried rocks that required the skill of a pioneer truck to shift using explosives. Our excavations complete, we gathered a good stock of planks and doors to form the roof. Tree stumps, sawn to an appropriate length, formed the supports necessary to hold the whole thing up when we piled the earth from the excavation on top of the roof timbers. Finally, we installed a fireplace made from a large tin can punctured with air holes made by our bayonets. The smoke from this precious little luxury, which we used only during darkness because of the risk of attracting enemy artillery fire, filtered to the outside through a pipe taken from the oven of an abandoned cottage. Meanwhile, the machine gun crews were busy building similar constructions. Trenches linked the bunkers. Now, after our retreat from Rostov, there was nothing to do but wait until the Russians made the next move. Christmas drew near. Sporadic artillery barrages prevented our wagons bringing hot food to the front line. To make myself useful, I fetched food from the field kitchens to take to the machine gun crews in their bunkers, where, because the Russian infantry was inactive, I had time to join in a hand or two of scat, a card game popular amongst the troops, as we chatted about life back in Germany. My father brought home an old musical box he found in a junk shop, recounted a Schütze as we played. He spent months in secret, taking it apart to clean it until every piece of the mechanism gleamed like new, a Christmas present for Mama. 2 ballerinas twirled to the music. Between them were 3 bells, each chimed a different note. Little bluebirds on wires pecked at 2 of the bells to make them ring, but the 3rd bird was missing. Papa handed her the present as we ate on Christmas Eve. When Mama saw the box, she burst into tears. "What is it?" Papa asked. Poor Mama couldn't speak. Dabbing her eyes with her napkin, she left the table and came back with her purse. She opened it, and to our astonishment took out the 3rd bluebird. "My father brought that very same musical box from France in 1918 when he was a soldier," said Mama. "I used to play with it for hours on end when I was a little girl, but we had to sell it to buy food. I cried my eyes out when I learned it was going, so he took off the bluebird and gave it to me to keep. He said it sang a song that only its companions could hear, and that one day it would call them back." The Schütze reached into his tunic pocket and took out a small oilskin bag. "Look," he said, taking the 3rd bluebird from the bag. "Mama said it will take me home safely when it returns to its companions." "Huh, superstitious nonsense," snorted another member of the machine gun crew. "If a shell has your name on it, you've had it just like any of us," he said, trumping one superstition with another. The telephone rang. The Unterscharführer in charge of the machine gun crew answered. Ja, he's with us," he said into the mouthpiece. He thrust the phone towards me. The line crackled, giving me time to wonder if I was about to hear some bad news from home. "Schütze Bartmann? Here." "Krocher here. Bartmann. It seems you were a baker before joining the Leibstandarte." I sighed in relief. "Jawohl, Hauptsturmführer, in Berlin, the Glaser Bakery in Memmelerstrasse." "Then I have a special request to ask of you. Of course I will do anything I can." I answered without asking any details of the request. After all, a request coming from someone of Leopold Krocher's rank was really a politely disguised order. "Ah, good. I would like you to prepare a little treat for the men for Christmas. Cakes, perhaps? You have permission to leave your post to look for ingredients." There is a house close to the field kitchen some way to the rear of your present position. It will be at your disposal when you are ready to start baking. Good luck." With predatory whistling sounds, the shells came screaming in. They travelled at speeds that made their curving trajectory easily visible but utterly impossible to avoid. Anyone caught in the open risked being torn apart, quite literally cut in half by the force of the blasts. A deafening salvo exploded close behind, and I threw myself into the security of our bunker just in time. Black boulders of ice and rocks the size of a man rumbled across the roof with a terrifying guttural thunder. Not a word passed between us during that bombardment. Bulging eyes and clenched teeth contorted every face into the personification of raw, helpless fear. It was like being buried alive beneath a sky of screaming iron. At last, the pounding of the giant detonations began to march downhill, away from our position and towards the heart of the village, pounding the centre of Sambeck with unrelenting fury. Once again, my guardian angel had looked down on me and kept me safe from a death I could not have anticipated or avoided. Thank God that's past. They're aiming for the church now. Probably think we have observers in the tower, sighed a camarade beside me, still catching his breath, his voice thin with adrenaline. When the hellish pounding finally came to a sudden eerie stop, I poked my head into the lingering daylight. Below, on the slope that swept down to the river, lay the smouldering ruins of Sambeck's houses, their rooftops torn away like paper, timber jutting skyward like broken ribs. The Usha in charge of our troop stood beside me, calmly scanning the devastation through his field glasses. "Blind gangers," he muttered, nodding at the smoking craters where enormous shells had failed to explode. "Hundreds of them." Then, with a dry chuckle and shake of the head, he added, "Look at them, the crazy bastards. The pioneer troop is clearing them already." His voice carried a strange blend of disbelief and grim admiration for the combat engineers, who were already stepping out onto the battlefield to remove the unexploded munitions while the earth was still hot beneath their boots. The stench came first. It curled through the thawing earth, seeped into our bunkers, our uniforms, and even our food. Complaints spilled from every man's lips, each more disgusted than the last. In desperation, we tied makeshift cloth masks over our faces, giving us the look of rugged outlaws from some wild frontier. "How can I eat with that stench in the air? It gets into the food," someone groaned. "Forget the food. It goes straight for my stomach," another retched. "I can hardly breathe. My lungs can't take it." The worst part, it could travel against the wind, an unrelenting sickly cloud that defied nature itself. Day by day, black grotesque shapes emerged from the snow, human bodies rotting in their Russian uniforms. It was a horror no words could capture. Each breath we took became an act of nausea. The scent of decay was so thick and all-consuming it felt like death itself was clawing into our throats. Finally, someone in command decided enough was enough. A Wehrmacht detail arrived, dragging with them a squad of Russian prisoners tasked with cleaning the mess. I watched as they picked through heaps of decomposing corpses, each wrapped in disintegrating cloth, limbs often separating from the torsos as they were moved. In one bizarre moment of macabre comedy, a prisoner tried to haul a cadaver by the legs. The head tore free and rolled away, bouncing downhill over the ice as the man instinctively stuck out his foot to stop it. The head evaded him, tumbling towards the river like a grim joke. I was certain the Russians on the far bank saw everything but held their fire, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of some shared understanding that the dead should not be interfered with. Rumours swirled again. This time it was said we were to be pulled back from the Mayus-Sambeck line. The idea sparked faint hope, but nothing happened until May 21st, when the SS Police Division rolled into the area. We packed our sparse belongings. Exhausted after the long, merciless winter, we yearned for rest. But fate had a cruel sense of humour. As the sky darkened and our trucks headed west towards Taganrog, they suddenly turned back. A Russian assault had broken through the SS police lines, and we were once again needed. We returned to Sambeck and were thrown into the defence of the very bunkers we had built before Christmas. No words were spoken. The disappointment hung heavy, bitter as bile. But the enemy was stopped in their tracks. We, the Leibstandarte, held firm and showed the Russians our resolve. The Russians never let up on their propaganda. Leaflets floated down from the sky every few days, urging us to surrender and promising good treatment. We scoffed. We knew better. We hadn't forgotten what happened to our reconnaissance men in Taganrog. Hands cut off, gloves of skin, they said. It was burned into our minds. The loudspeakers came next. Crude poles with amplified female voices broadcasting across the meadows. One voice, taunting and syrupy, spoke of our wives and sweethearts being unfaithful. It meant little to me. I'd never had a girlfriend. But then she said something curious. "We wish the Leibstandarte a happy break in France and look forward to seeing you again later." That made us pause. Could it be true? Could we really be headed west? The hope didn't last long. Another bright day, another withdrawal order, and then another reversal. We went back yet again to Sambeck, close combat, house by house, trench by trench, and we retook our old positions. It was madness. 2 full divisions had failed to do what we, though depleted, managed to do twice. We held. And finally, we left for good. After the blood and frost of Sambeck, Taganrog felt like a distant dream, but it was Mariupol that gave us our first real respite. The coastal port, with its salt-tinged breeze and soft waves, became our sanctuary. We stripped off our shirts, revealing skin as pale as paper, and lay on the warm beaches below the cliffs. Some swam, others just lay back and stared at the blue dome above. There were no shells, no death screams, no biting wind, just the soft sound of the sea and the rare joy of uninterrupted sleep. Even lice, our constant companions, were at last driven out. The delousing station made our skin raw, but the relief was indescribable. From the coast we moved inland to Stalino. The heat became oppressive, choking us in our tents as we lay with the flaps tied wide open. A few green recruits from Lichterfelde joined us there, fresh faces with stories from Berlin and the Reich. We trained relentlessly in the heat. No rest, no laziness, just routine. Up at 6, formations, drills, preparation. One afternoon, we gathered in the shade as an Oberscharführer handed out decorations. I received the Sturmabzeichen for 10 days of continuous combat during the Rostov campaign. It was my first medal. I turned it over in my hands like a child with a treasured toy, memorizing every curve, every edge. That evening, I couldn't help but ask, how did that Russian woman with the loudspeaker know we were headed to France? Boris shrugged. Spies, or some poor bastard officer got caught and spilled everything before they gutted him. And then it came, early July. Our Sturmgeschütze and supply trucks were loaded onto long transport wagons. We climbed into the goods wagons like schoolboys boarding a train for a summer holiday. Boris couldn't shut up about the women. "I was in Toulouse once," he beamed. "French girls, they're angels." The medic grinned and asked, "Better than Danish girls?" Boris nodded with enthusiasm. "You'll see." I joined the banter. "I've still got all my condoms." The laughter echoed inside the wagon. Truth be told, I had never even slept with a girl. 18 and a half, and nothing to tell. But I kept that to myself. Another soldier shouted from the back, "Not a single girl, not one, never." More laughter. For months we'd lived without rest, women, warmth, or relief. It had been kill or be killed, no room for fantasies. But now it was France. The medic leaned against the doorway. "Morgen, Erwin," he said, hands in his pockets. Still groggy, I stepped over my comrades and joined him. "We should keep low in case of partisans." "Too far from the front," he waved it off. "Relax." The air smelled clean. It really was a beautiful morning. We talked about France. He'd been to Paris after Dunkirk. "Don't underestimate the British," he added. Sepp Dietrich himself had a British major buried with honours after Dunkirk. I asked why. The major grabbed a rifle from one of our men and got it straight from Croce, he grinned. He spread his arms wide and sang, "Farewell, farewell to Mother Russia." We jumped up and cheered. Eventually the train brought us into the Saarland. Somewhere along a siding, we stopped to stretch our legs. Hans climbed a tall wooden fence to see what was on the other side. "Anyone up for a beer?" he asked. I stared. "What if the train leaves?" "Tell them to wait, to play cards, chess, and let our thoughts wander, often to the keenly anticipated encounters with the beautiful French girls we had heard so much about." But to our disappointment, those encounters remained the stuff of rumor. A few days after settling into our billet, under a clear blue summer sky, an Unterscharführer, ruddy-faced and cheerful, the son of an Austrian farmer, called out a list of names at morning roll call. Mine was among them. We were ordered to remain behind while the rest of the company was dismissed. I looked around and recognized several familiar faces, men who had fought beside me in Russia. Their expressions mirrored my own, confused, wary, unsure of what to expect. The Usha grinned, his booming voice almost theatrical. "I have a pleasant surprise for you old hares from the Ostfront. Today you will see the sights of Paris." His arm swept dramatically toward a waiting truck. "Gentlemen, take your seats." We clambered into the back, spirits lifting. As the engine revved and we began moving, our mood brightened even more. The truck rumbled through a small village where a girl, maybe 18, stood at a street corner, shielding her eyes against the sun. She smiled and waved, and we returned her favor with howls and whistles like schoolboys, our heads craning backward as she vanished into the distance, her hair whipping in the breeze. The further we drove, the broader the roads became, the more elegant the buildings, the more vibrant the life. There was no rubble here, no scorched ruins or burned-out tanks. The roads were smooth, the people unbothered. I found it almost miraculous that this beautiful city, Paris, had escaped the war so untouched. When we crossed the Seine on a wide bridge lined with ornate lamps, Boris squealed and pointed like an excited child. "Look, the Eiffel Tower!" But we didn't stop. It slipped behind trees and rooftops as the truck carried us deeper into the city. Eventually, we came to a halt at the edge of a vast plaza, near what I assumed was a park. Our Usha leapt from the cab and barked, "Everybody out!" We did as ordered and stood, gazing around in stunned silence at the grandeur. "Come," said the Usha, beckoning like a schoolteacher. He led us to a tall stone obelisk. "Granite, from Luxor," he said proudly. I traced the hieroglyphs with my eyes, marveling at the mystery etched into its surface. Over 3,000 years old, the story of Ramses I and II. Now turn around. We obeyed, and what I had taken for a park revealed itself to be the beginning of the magnificent Avenue des Champs-Élysées. "Those statues are the horses of Mali," he continued, "man taming the forces of nature." In the distance, the Arc de Triomphe rose high above the city, but we would not get closer today. Back in the truck, we passed through narrower streets, the buildings looming like stone cliffs on either side. Every window was flung open in the summer heat. I remember the street name Rue d'Amsterdam. Then we turned into a broader boulevard with a shaded central strip and crowds of civilians who moved about as if they were not under occupation at all. "Die Rote Mühle!" Boris exclaimed, pointing at the red windmill atop the low building, the famous Moulin Rouge. The truck screeched to a halt, barely missing a man on a tricycle delivering baguettes. The man shot us a look that needed no translation. Later that afternoon, we were seated inside the Moulin Rouge itself, sipping cold beer and watching the chorus girls dance in their shimmering costumes. It felt unreal, a dream after the filth and blood of Russia. It honestly and made us feel like kings. Of course, we knew they were prostitutes, but their beauty, their perfume, the gentle caress of their fingers, stirred something primal and painful in us, desire mixed with a deep, aching nostalgia. One girl, young, pale, and hauntingly lovely, began to sing Jatendrai. Her voice was soft, aching. The room fell into hushed reverence. I felt a chill crawl down my spine and tears sting the back of my eyes. When she finished, applause thundered through the bar and she bowed shyly, cheeks flushed. Then we sang Das ist Berlin, our own voice rising in counterpoint to hers. Suddenly, the door crashed open. In marched our giant Austrian Usha with a girl slung under one arm, her legs flailing as she shrieked in French. We arrived taken by my mother's studio back home. The Rottenführer added a final announcement. Hauptsturmführer Springer has been transferred to 1st Kompanie. As a gift, he and several officers risked entering the unoccupied zone to bring back items for you to buy. I purchased a silk scarf and stockings to send home to my mother. Reinforcements arrived daily, and excitement swelled in our company trupp. We cleaned our vehicle, smiling officers. Though we couldn't hear what was said, their praise was obvious. "They love our Sepp," said Boris. "We all do," I replied. "He's the pride of Germany. We wouldn't have made it out of Russia without him." Boris laughed. "He's so small. Who'd guess he could lead giants?" "Napoleon wasn't tall either," I said. "No," Boris grinned. "But our Austrian Usha is tall in every way." The joke circled back to that night in Paris, the bucket of water, and the astonished cry of "Mon Dieu." After packing our gear onto the trucks, we drove westward toward a village near Francheville in Normandy, where we took up quarters in a large room above the restaurant of a quaint hotel nestled in a quiet leafy spot, not far from a bubbling stream. It felt like the kind of peaceful place people might choose for a weekend getaway in another life. A few days after our arrival, word came through of my promotion to Sturman. The very first rung of the ladder. Did no time in writing home to share the news with my parents. The hotel proprietor, a sallow man with a perpetually defeated expression, made no attempt to hide his disappointment at our presence, though to his credit, he never raised a complaint. Perhaps he hoped we'd be gone sooner than later. When a delivery of proper bunk men, a small detail that said much about the deep trust we had forged on the battlefield. To make the place feel more our own, one of the men who was good with a brush painted a massive eagle clutching a swastika on the gable wall. It was modelled after the insignia on our uniforms, bold and unmistakable. The first time the proprietor laid eyes on it, he let out a choked grunt of disapproval, but to us, it brought a strange sense of home. It wasn't long before we welcomed unimpressed. "You must have gotten lost, my friend," he said bluntly. "What do you mean?" the recruit shot back with an offended scowl. Boris tilted his head. "This is the Leibstandarte," as if that alone should explain everything. "And what's that supposed to mean?" the little man demanded. Boris smirked. "Heus," delivered with such arrogance only made Boris more irritated. "Heus, huh? That's supposed to mean something? My father's a professor at the University of Stuttgart." Boris snorted. "Ah, pulling strings, are we?" But as always happens, once the excitement and ego clashes settled down, the newcomers folded into our group and things returned to normal. Though our days were filled with training and guard duty, morning roll call was more forgiving, sometimes not until 5 a.m. In the evenings, when the weather was good, we took our meal outdoors, mostly just sandwiches, stripped to the waist at a long wooden picnic table in the shade of a tall tree. One sunny evening we were discussing a form we had been given that afternoon, one that allowed us to formally renounce our membership of the church, and in doing so be freed from paying the Kirchensteuer, the church tax deducted from our wages. Though I believed in a creator, I signed the form. I thought the money would do better in my own pocket than in church coffers. The Catholics among us all refused. They remained faithful to their church, as they always had. As the sun dipped below the trees that lined the roadside, our conversation naturally shifted to girls. Always the girls. The ones we had glimpsed in shops or on the street, but never dared speak to. To my right sat Heinz Ehlers, and beyond him was Furch, easily the most handsome man in our troop, maybe in all of 4th Company. "I'm telling you," said Ehlers, nudging Furch. "They were looking right at me, into my eyes, practically begging me to say something." I laughed and ruffled his hair. "It's the blonde hair and baby face, Benjamin." That was the nickname I had given him, after the youngest son of biblical Joseph. At that moment, a car pulled up behind the hedge near the hotel garden. 2 doors slammed. The creaking of the rusty yard gate brought us all instinctively to attention. An unfamiliar high-ranking officer came strolling toward us, hands behind his back. At his side was an Untersturmführer from our own battalion. "That man," I whispered to Ehlers. "I've seen him at HQ, a Sturmbannführer from Berlin. What does he want with us?" As they approached, we stood silent, the breeze rustling gently through the trees. "Sturmbannführer Linger is looking for personnel to assist him," the Untersturmführer said. Linger's eyes scanned our faces one by one. After a moment, he pointed at Furch. "What is your name?" Furch stood. "Schütze Furch, Sturmbannführer." "Step out," said the officer. Furch, a little red in the cheeks, walked over to them. Linger studied him from head to toe, then gave a nod, turned, and walked back to the car. I clapped Furch on the back. "Do you know who that was?" I asked. He shook his head. "That's Hitler's valet. You'll be in Berlin at the Reich Chancellery before you know it." A few days later, Furch left for Battalion HQ. That was the last I ever saw of him. In mid-August 1942, the Allies stormed ashore at Dieppe, 100 kilometers to the north. We moved out of our billet, ready for battle, but the raid turned into a catastrophe for them. Their tanks bogged down in deep shingle, only one made it to the esplanade. Our artillery hit one of their warships. Most of the survivors were Canadians, and they were captured by Wehrmacht units. We never got into the fighting ourselves, but morale soared. We were sent to a nearby camp briefly to help secure the prisoners. A few tried to set fire to the huts, and some threatened to escape, but we were only needed a few hours. When we returned to the hotel, we found our SS Eagle mural scraped from the wall. Naturally, we were furious and summoned the proprietor. "I meant no offence, gentlemen," he said, hands up in that Gallic shrug. "But surely you can understand my position." I took pity on him. "Find us some paint and we'll call it even." We repainted the wall and soon moved out to a gardener's house in the grounds of an elegant chateau surrounded by apple orchards. An old flagpole on the lawn was broken, but we fixed it. Each morning at 8, our company gathered there as our flag was raised. But I didn't get to sleep in. I had to wake an hour earlier, collect the weather report, then rouse Hauptsturmführer Waldmüller with coffee and croissant and read the weather to him while he ate. Around that time, I was awarded the Ostmedaille for surviving the brutal winter on the Eastern Front. Ehlers and I were appointed as batmen to Waldmüller, who was strict but fair. We cleaned his boots, his uniform, and occasionally overheard BBC broadcasts from his radio, which we were strictly warned never to speak of. One of our less pleasant duties was opening and reviewing letters from the men. If any revealed details about our location, Waldmüller tossed them in a bin. We burned them later. Sorting the possessions of the dead fell to us too, and among them I once found a rusty old Belgian pistol, an FN 7.65. I foolishly fired 2 shots into the earth to loosen the rust, and somehow Waldmüller found out. At the next roll call he frowned deeply and sentenced me to 3 days in the bunker, a hut in the woods, more leaky than secure, but it wasn't so bad. I even got food and drink from passers-by. On Sunday night, the UVD told me I was free. Not because of mercy, Waldmüller just missed his Batman. No record of the offence made it into my Soldbuch. The following weekend was Waldmüller's 30th birthday. Officers came from across the battalion and the chateau was awash in wine and cognac. The celebration ended with him firing his P-38 at the nearby church bell. Sparks flew. The priest stormed over, but Waldmüller calmed him, later sending me to deliver an apology. Still, the tension of being young men, full of desire, stuck in a quiet corner of France with no chance of romance, gnawed at us. As a distraction, a few of us went to a village pub. There, Flemish volunteers offered coffee, which turned out to be laced with Calvados. It was only after we stumbled out into the night air that we realized we were drunk. Ehlers and I got separated from the others and found ourselves on a railway embankment. "Watch out for trains," he slurred as we tumbled down the side like drunks in a comedy. Somehow, we found our way back. At breakfast, the others filled in the gaps we couldn't remember. Word of our misadventures in the village passed among our camaraden faster than we could have hoped to contain them. Some of the stories, I dearly hope, were the exaggerated fantasies of overactive imaginations, tales spun with the sole aim of maximizing our embarrassment. Regardless, the damage to our dignity was done. Life continued, and though we remained stationed in the tranquility of the French countryside, there was an air of unease beneath the peace. We had heard the unmistakable drone of enemy aircraft, the low hum of engines, the whispering cut of wings through the damp night air, yet never once did we see the planes themselves. Whoever piloted them must have been extraordinarily skilled. They flew low, likely with feathered engines, slipping in under the cover of darkness to make their landings as silent and invisible as ghosts. Despite all our efforts, patrols sent scouring the countryside, eyes always scanning the skies, we never did those garden. A ladder lashed with rope led to the thick horizontal boughs. From there, one climbed carefully to a second ladder that reached the crown, now cut flat and cleared to make room for a small platform just large enough for a single person to perch. I had been up there several times myself, I can say honestly that the climb, even by daylight, was not for the faint-hearted. Every time I scaled that creaking height, I felt one gust of wind or one bad step away from breaking my neck. Still, the view from the top was commanding. Wide, unobstructed, peaceful in daylight, but filled with menace after sunset. A telephone line ran all the way down, connecting the lookout directly with the command post below. Day and night, one of us manned it without fail. One evening, while I stood on guard duty by the chateau, a group of high-ranking officers arrived with their wives in tow. They had come, I later learned, specifically to marvel at the observation platform and its ingenuity. Among them was our newly appointed battalion commander, Sturmbannführer Albert Frey. He came from Heidelberg, the son of a master baker, a detail that oddly gave me some small feeling of kinship with the man, even if our lives had taken very different paths. His wife, Lotta, was striking, vivacious, poised, with the sort of figure that turned heads even among hardened soldiers. To our surprise, she insisted on climbing the tree herself, declaring she wanted to see the world from up there, and she did, with poise and bravery. Watching her ascend with grace, then later descend with just a hint of hesitation, I admired her spirit. It was no small feat, especially for someone unaccustomed to the risks we faced every day. My role as Batman to Waldmüller came to an end not long after that, when I was appointed courier for the company. Every evening, rain or shine, I was tasked with carrying written communications between battalion and company headquarters. The walk took 2 hours each way, a lonely march through country roads and past sleepy villages. One particular evening sticks in my mind, the air heavy with the kind of rain that soaks through to your bones. That same day, word had reached us that our divisional commander, Fritz Witt, had been to Paris to handpick girls for brothels, exclusive to the men of the Leibstandarte. The absurdity and luxury of such arrangements felt far removed from the soaked paper I carried in my satchel. As I trudged past the local inn, I noticed a bicycle leaning against the wall, unattended. I paused, staring at it in the rain. The thought crept in, it would cut my journey in half. But I hesitated. If caught, it would mean punishment. Perhaps a fine, or worse, the loss of my newly earned promotion. I looked up. Nothing but a steel-grey sheet of clouds. I looked down the road. Empty. Heart pounding, I swung my leg over the frame, grabbed the handlebars, and pedalled hard into the gloom, hoping I wouldn't be seen. I reached Battalion HQ without incident and wasted no time heading back. The whole ride, I imagined military police waiting for me at the inn, ready to drag me away. But when I returned, no one was there. With relief washing over me, I carefully placed the bicycle exactly where I had found it, leaned it gently against the same wall. My heart still raced, but I was grinning. The adrenaline, the guilt, the triumph of having gotten away with it, it all hit at once. The thirst I had worked up couldn't be ignored, so I pushed open the door to the inn and walked up to the bar. Inside stood one of our Flemish acquaintances, nursing a drink with a lazy grin. I bought him a beer and, in a conspiratorial tone, told him the whole story of the bike. He let out a deep laugh and slapped my shoulder. "Ah, that would be my bike you're speaking about," he said, chuckling. "Don't worry about it. The state I was in tonight, I don't think I could have ridden it anyway." We laughed, clinked our glasses, and for a moment the war felt far, far away. Fritz Witt's trip had not been in vain. The prostitutes he found in Paris were soon installed in a hotel near company headquarters. It seemed he had decided it was far better for his soldiers to visit a regulated and medically controlled establishment than to take their chances with local street girls and risk infection. After all, a sick soldier was a useless soldier. With my 19th birthday just a few months away, I finally decided it was time to lose my virginity. As I turned into the street where the hotel was located, my nerves began to betray me, legs like jelly, stomach in knots. 2 soldiers from another company stood near the doorway smoking. They saw me. It was too late to turn back. I entered, handed my rifle to the UVD inside, and stepped into the restaurant. Girls milled about, exchanging glances, touches, and light flirtations with the Waffen-SS men lounging at tables. The atmosphere was relaxed, if loud, filled with the drunken babble of overstimulated young men. I made my way to the bar. The full-bosomed barmaid offered a smile and leaned forward to grab a bottle from beneath the counter. "Ah, a new customer," "How old are you?" she asked. 18, I replied. As she stood, I caught myself staring at her décolleté. She smirked. "Looking for a girl?" The question hit me like a jolt of electricity. All I had to do was say, "Ja." I opened my mouth to respond, but what emerged was a strange, croaking sound. With a wave of her hand, she called over a matronly woman in her 30s. "This is the Puff Mutter," she said. "She'll fix you up." The Puff Mutter looked me over with her hands on her hips, then nodded confidently. "I have just the right girl for you," she said, and beckoned me forward. In a blur, I found myself paying the fee and receiving a green ticket that bore a room number and a name. Yvonne. The Puff Mutter guided me to a medical orderly seated at the foot of a staircase. He passed me a freshly laundered towel. "Show me your ticket," he said with a yawn. He glanced at it and gave a lazy smile. "Ah, Yvonne, she's nice. First time." I nodded. "Show me your condom." Fumbling through my tunic, I pulled out one of the standard issue condoms. "When you're finished, I want to see that filled. Don't throw it away." Again, I nodded, now noticing a white cloth draped over a shallow tray. "Room 9, you have 15 minutes, he said, jerking his head toward the stairs. 15 minutes didn't sound like much, but I wasn't about to argue. My heart pounding, I raced up the steps and along the dim corridor. I knocked on the door of room 9 with a white-knuckled hand. The door opened to reveal a pretty young woman. I handed her the ticket, still half believing this might be a dream. It was her, the girl who had sung so sweetly in that Paris bar, but if she recognized me, she gave no sign. "Yvonne," I mumbled. "Qui," she said, taking my hand and leading me to the double bed. "Give me your condom and take off your clothes," she said flatly, like reciting lines she had repeated 1,000 times. My virginity was gone, and though the act had been clinical, I would never forget it. At the bottom of the stairs, I held out the used condom between 2 fingers. The medic examined it, nodded, and produced a small bucket. I dropped it in, where it landed among a sea of other used rubbers. "Now drop your trousers," he instructed. He whipped away the cloth on the tray, revealing a thick syringe filled with a brown liquid. Before I could react, he grabbed my penis and drove the blunt needle into my urethra. I winced as he slowly injected the sulfonamide solution. It was deeply unpleasant. "You'll be fine in an hour," he said afterward. He stamped a form with the date and address of the bordello. "Keep this in your soldbuch. It proves you were properly sanitized. If anything goes wrong, show it to your company doctor. Keep it for 10 weeks. My brother and his fiancée had chosen to hold their wedding on Christmas Day, 1942. I had been granted leave to attend the ceremony in Berlin and was looking forward to it, but word of my baking reputation had spread among the officers, and Waldmüller asked me to prepare Christmas treats for the whole of 4th Company. Once more, fate handed me a baker's apron, and I accepted. Waldmüller, always fair, promised me my leave was only deferred, not cancelled. Over 3 days leading up to Christmas, I baked cakes and cookies while the French bakers continued their usual work at night. Unfortunately, exposure to yeast and dough caused a rash to bloom on my hands. Knowing soldiers with any kind of infection were barred from leave, I tried not to think about it. Instead, I embraced the festivities. That Christmas was perhaps the most joyful of my life. We dined like kings in the chateau: roast piglet, vegetables, and potatoes. Heinz König surprised us all with his talent on the piano and entertained us non-stop. The day after Christmas I reported to the company doctor. Though the rash had improved, a faint redness lingered. He refused to sign my leave pass. I had already missed Horst's wedding, and now it looked like my entire leave was gone. My mother hadn't seen me since summer 1941. I feared it would break her heart. When I told Waldmüller, he nodded sympathetically. "Give me the pass. Don't say a word to anyone." He smiled slyly. I was once a police detective. When he returned it, the pass bore the doctor's signature. No explanation was offered. I didn't need one. I packed a bottle of Calvados and made my way to the rail station in Evreux on the evening of December 28th. The platform was packed with Wehrmacht troops. I managed to push my way into a carriage and stood the entire 12-hour journey to Berlin. By sheer luck, as I walked along Strausberger Strasse, my mother spotted me from our apartment window. She threw it open, then disappeared, only to reappear moments later in the street, coatless despite the icy air. "Oh, Erwin," she sobbed as she embraced me. "It's been so long. We were so worried. I hope that phone call from Horst didn't get you in trouble. I put him up to it, you know." "No, Mama, it didn't," I replied. The call had come when I was on telephone duty in Taganrog. Our company had been pushing forward relentlessly, and I hadn't written in weeks. Horst, working as a telephonist with the Air Ministry, had managed to arrange the call. I still remember the shock when the officer handed me the phone saying, "It's for you." Hearing Horst's voice had brought tears to my eyes. I had been overwhelmed with longing for home. Now, at last, I was there. "Mutti," I said, wrapping my arm around her shoulder, "it's good to be home." New Year's Eve was a quiet affair with my parents. On New Year's Day, we travelled in light snowfall to Erkner to visit Horst's new in-laws. I had missed the Führer's traditional Christmas schnapps gift, distributed to every man in the Leibstandarte, but brought along the Calvados I'd purchased instead. Horst and his new wife arrived with biscuits and cakes. We shared family stories, laughed, and enjoyed one of the most peaceful days I'd had in years. But peace never lasted. "Son, son, wake up," my father whispered the next morning. "An urgent telegram for you." I rubbed my eyes. It was already midday on January 1st. "What does it say?" "You must return to your company on January 4th. Did that mean I had to leave on the 4th, or be there by then? My father said go immediately. Horst thought I should wait. I chose to stay. Just before Christmas, Ella's and I had been ordered won't be tortured. Night after night, we worked intoxicated by fumes and speculation. Then came the twist. A truck arrived with new canisters. Colours changed. Back to white. Looks like it's the Ostfront for you. We didn't protest. We were the Führer's elite. Orders were orders. On January 4th, I reported to the Schlesischer Bahnhof and found a few others from our company already waiting. Soon we were 8, all seeking passage to France. No train came. We went to our old barracks at Lichterfelde, where we waited again. Then on to Magdeburg, where a Totenkopf unit prepared for Russia. We made sure our paperwork was in order, a necessity in those days. Still nothing. No food, no drink. In desperation, we brought our gear to my parents' home for safekeeping, then set off to Oranienburg concentration camp, where the Totenkopf canteen was said to be generous. The guards welcomed us. They gave us food, schnapps, and cigarettes. We signed for it all, but who paid, I never found out. That night, we pushed my parents' beds together, and soon I will be back in Russia, fighting for my life and my brothers in arms.